Hello, 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 everyone, and welcome to Watch from Home Theater, our cozy little live stream here where we get to watch movies together even while we're staying at home. I'm Akeem Lawanson filling in for Clint Gage, and tonight we are watching X-Men Days of Future Past with a very, very special guest. Now, before we get to that, though, we do have some clips we'll be playing throughout the stream, but not the whole movie. So, if you'd like to get synced up with us, and join us during this watch party, take this opportunity right now to queue up your copy of X-Men Days of Future Past. Just so you have the right copy queued up, we'll be watching the theatrical release of the film. If you own it digitally, what you can do is you can queue it right on up to the very beginning, right before the studio logo. Or if you've got a Blu-ray or something like that, just get past all that FBI warning stuff to just in front of the Fox logo. If you don't have a copy of the movie at all, well, you can sign up for 1 free week of Hulu Plus Live TV and sync up with us over there, which is pretty cool because, we all love free stuff. I know I do. While you guys go take care of all of that, let's give a very, very warm welcome to our guest tonight. But first, IGN's very own comic book expert, Joshua Yehl, will be joining us as well. Joshua, what's going on? Are you excited to watch this movie tonight?
Hey, I'll take all that warm love that was meant for our guest, and I'll just take it all over me. But no, yeah, I'm super excited. This is one of my favorite superhero movies, and I can't wait to watch it.
Yes, me too. And our very, very special guest, not to take anything away from Joshua, of course, he's special, writer, producer of X-Men Days of Future Past, Simon Kinberg. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited. I've been watching these, and I'm excited to be part of it.
Yes. Well, now the thing is, you've had a very, very long relationship with the X-Men. First with writing X-Men: The Last Stand, which was released in 2006. We're about to watch X-Men: Days of Future Past. What was it about this particular X-Men storyline that inspired you to adapt it to the big screen?
Well, I mean, this is one of my favorite of the comic runs ever. And after I worked on, like you said, this sort of called the first run of the original X-Men cast, and then I continued on with the X-Men First Class cast. After we did X-Men First Class, and it was successful, and we had such a great cast for that, and we had such a great cast for the original films, the notion of doing a cross-generational and a story that is so great in the comic anyway, a cross-generational story in Days of Future Past where we could have both casts in the same movie was so juicy to me. That it was an idea that, just seemed kind of like a no-brainer. And for the studio, they were really excited too, but daunted by having to sign a whole lot of people to a whole lot of new contracts because there's a lot of big movie stars in the film. But I love the story. I'm somebody who loves time travel as a genre, and I also just really like this idea of seeing the old and the young versions of characters that I grew up loving.
Now, what was it your initial intent to, kind of connect the X-Men Last Stand and kind of course correct some of the things that happened in that film with this one?
Yes, the short answer. Well, when I started thinking about Days of Future Past, certainly one of the things that I saw as an opportunity, and one of the juiciest things about it was that we could, and it's a sort of central theme of the movie itself, without the meta aspects of it, the central theme of, can you change your destiny? Can you change your future? Or can you change the things that have already happened in the course of time? And so that was true for the characters. That was true for the history generally. And then specifically, it was true, obviously, for some things that maybe we would have done differently in X-Men: The Last Stand if we had to do it all over again.
Well, you know what, Simon? I'm super duper excited to watch this with you, and you too, Joshua. You're here.
Me too, Joshua.
Appreciate it. Yeah, thanks, guys.
Yes. All right, let's get into the movie. Now, for those of you guys watching at home, here's your last chance to get synced up with us. Queue up your copy of X-Men Days of Future Past and get ready to hit play. In the meantime, let's keep this interactive. This is a live stream after all. Wherever you are watching on the internet, be sure to leave your comments and questions for Simon, and we'll get to as many of your questions during this live stream. So without further ado, we're about to click play in 3, 2, 1, play.
So cool. It's like I was saying to you guys, it's been a while since I did like a director or filmmaker commentary. You know, and it's they're few and far between now, and I miss them. So this is a cool way to do it.
No, yeah, it's super exciting to get some insight on this because believe us, we got a lot of questions.
I think I'm prepared, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think it is so special that you were able to pull it off and make this happen because it's so unique to have two casts playing such iconic characters and to bring them together into the same movie. It seems crazy even saying it. It's almost crazy to think that it actually happened.
Yeah, it was an amazing thing to pull off. I mean, the studio, like I said, Tom Rothman, who was the chairman of the studio, Emma Watts, who was really the person who had her hand on the movie, and our producers, Lauren Trujillo-Donner and Hutch Parker, they were all just so supportive of it creatively that they just made it happen. And it wasn't just about money, it was about time too. Getting all these people in the same place is not an easy feat, given their careers and the requirements of their lives. So there was a lot of very fancy footwork that I had nothing to do with. They got them all to the same place when they needed to be.
Yeah, but here it is. So this is, of course, a very grim start to the movie, showing what happens. This is what the mutants are fighting to stop, but it has come to pass. I'm curious, is this the original way that the movie started, or did you have any other ideas on how to kick things off?
It's not the original way that the movie started. It was something that we, after watching the movie and it being kind of exclusively about Trask, we felt like we wanted to open it up a little bit so that the audience could see that the world, what the impact had been on the world, that the world in the future was this really grim sort of. Obviously, we took a page out of Terminator-like future, where humans and mutants actually alike are living in a really sort of dark world. We just thought that was a great way to start set up the stakes of the film, not just for our main characters, but for everyone, whether they be mutant or human, watching the movie.
So this belt that we're getting a close-up on here, is that a particular character's belt, or is it just sort of an X-Men lost who died there?
It was just meant to, we didn't have a particular X-Men in mind. That was actually an idea of Bryan Singer. Bryan had a lot of good ideas in this movie. That was an idea of Bryan's, to take, again, what is sort of generally a grim future and then to make it really specific to the X-Men.
Cool.
Yeah. I was also kind of fascinated with that device that was on the back of everyone's neck. I was kind of wondering what was that device and what was it used for?
The notion was that it was something that would test for mutancy. And so in a way, what it was, I mean, obviously, Magneto's history in the Holocaust, and we see it in X-Men 1 and in X-Men First Class. And so we wanted to sort of echo to some extent the tattoo on victims of the Holocaust's arms with something physical.
And just out of curiosity, where did the movie originally start before you added that scene?
Basically here.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So you saw that there are mutants in hiding, and there are these robots. There's mysterious robots, the Sentinels, the sort of futuristic or future Sentinels, where our heroes are sort of living underground, and it's a really strong opening. But again, like we just felt like it was so focused on the victimization of the mutants, it didn't feel as though we had a sense of how the world had been impacted. All this.
And this opening is just so great because it's one fan favorite after another, fully realized, looking badass and powerful. And it really says a lot that they get their butts kicked and how dangerous the Sentinels are.
Yeah, I mean, like, obviously we wanted to set up how dangerous and scary the Sentinels were. And this movie really, I would say, more than any of the other X-Men movies that I've worked on, and maybe I would argue any of the X-Men movies, is one really for the fans, where we really... we have probably more famous and fan favorite X-Men characters than any of the other movies. And we want to see all their powers, and we want to see them team up. I mean, the notion of Bishop and Kitty Pryde, running through, using her power to run through things, and the way that you see with there's a moment coming up with Kitty. We're going to see it in a second. Yeah, there he is. Using his ice slide, and that moment between the two of them that sort of indicates their relationship. We just felt like you could do character work. I mean, it's what the X-Men comics do so well. They combine character with story and spectacle. We felt like this could be a big, great sequence as it is to find the Sentinels' powers in the future, start to set up the mystery of how they have these sort of transformative powers, because that's going to link back eventually, as you know, to Raven, Mystique's powers, and her ability to transform.
I will say that seeing Iceman not only do the ice slide but appear in full ice block form was like a mind-blowing, fan-pleasing moment. I was like so happy. Not even 10 minutes in, and I'm just like crying from nerd tears of happiness. But then he gets brutally murdered, but it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, but you have a sense that because at the time, you specifically as a fan, especially knowing the comic, presumably, that there's going to be a chance to change this future, and that's the stake of the movie. But yes, no, I was excited to see. I mean, in general, I feel like Iceman, that Bobby had not had his full due in terms of being having a sort of kick-ass moment action-wise. We've written so many Danger Room scenes for him, and they never really we never shot them properly or done them. So this was a chance to have him, like you said, fully iced out, so to speak.
I was a huge fan. So I was introduced to Days of Future Past through the Fox Kids animated series, and so I was super psyched to see Bishop. He was the man back then. So I'm kind of curious, was there anything from the 90s cartoon series that you kind of felt necessary to include in the film for fans?
Yeah, yes, Bishop is one. I mean, if you know the comics and the cartoons, I took a lot of liberties with them, specifically who it is that is the time traveler in the story. It's Kitty Pryde in the comic, and we made it Wolverine for reasons we can talk about. But interestingly, both Bryan Singer and Matthew Vaughn, and originally this movie was meant to be directed by Matthew Vaughn. After Matthew directed X-Men First Class, we then went on to start to develop the sequel to that was this, Days of Future Past. And I went all the way into, I think Matthew has a story credit on Days of Future Past. We really worked the story together. I wrote the script for him. He read it. He really liked it. He decided not to do it because he wanted to do something his own. I don't think he just was a little burned out on doing other people's work and doing a sequel. So at any rate, both Matthew and Bryan, who ultimately directed the movie, obviously, and it's his imprint on the film, they're huge fans of the cartoons. They actually, I would say, feel more of a connection to the cartoons than they do the comics. And so, as much as I would say I also love the cartoons, I grew up as a huge fan. I'm older than you, so I grew up as a huge fan of and the cartoons were around when I was a kid, but the comics were it for me. So it was sort of an interesting balance between me and the directors, because they would bring a lot from the cartoons. And Bryan and I watched, both for this and for Apocalypse, the cartoon runs of these stories.
Yeah, I feel like I'm glad you guys didn't make Bishop the one to travel back in time, because he was a bit of a, I don't know. The way I recently revisited the animated series, and Bishop just wasn't. I don't know. He seemed like a bit of a buffoon. I love him. I love Bishop, but he was like, "What am I doing?" He seemed very confused.
Yeah.
As to why he traveled back in time. He doesn't know why he's there, and it was just. I'm glad you guys didn't go that route.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, look, we chose Wolverine for some reasons that are obvious and some reasons that aren't obvious. The obvious one is that Hugh Jackman as Wolverine became the biggest star in the movie franchise. and to some extent, he's one of the biggest stars, obviously, in the comics. But the other reason was, I thought there was something really interesting emotionally, thematically, about the idea that Wolverine, who was taught by Professor X essentially to grow up, or at least to become part of a community and to, in some ways, become a leader, would have to go back in time to teach those same lessons to a young Professor X. I thought there was something so cool and ironic, and potentially emotional about that the student becomes the teacher to their teacher. That became like kind of the backbone of the movie for me. And it just so happens that Hugh and / Wolverine, is the sort of Tony Stark of our Avengers.
I love that we finally get Professor X's floaty wheelchair.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't remember if that was something that was in the script or that was something that Brian and I talked about, but I know it was something that Brian was really excited about. And yeah, I think it's dope. And the way that we did it was pretty cool. This was also something, seeing the things that Patrick is describing, these flashes, this was something that there are not a lot of reshoots in this movie, actually, very few, especially for a movie of this size. But this was a reshoot just so that the audience really took aboard what it is that Charles is saying about, obviously that's a clip from First Class, but what Charles is saying, and the importance of Mystique to this story. We felt like that was a really important thing that the audience was not confused about in a movie that is a little confusing. Time travel in general is like not a whole lot of fun to write, because of all the time paradoxes and all of the twisty turny things you have to think about every time you make any move narratively.
Yeah, for sure, and we'll get to it later. But there is a scene where you guys they openly discuss time travel and how it works, and it's one of the more interesting things about this movie. But yeah, I'll wait till we get to Beast's little moment.
Yeah, no, I know that scene was one that I take these movies very seriously, and I did a lot of research on, scientific and sort of theoretical physicists' notions of what time travel would be, and so and then I found this thing called the immutability of time, or the immutability principle, and I was like, wow, that has the word kind of mutant in it. Feels like it would be a good one for us, and it does actually. It's relevant to the film.
I love the design of these Sentinels, and it's kind of twisted to be like, oh yeah, they have some of Mystique's shape-shifting DNA, and that's how they become so dangerous and unstoppable. So yeah, where did that idea come from?
It came from the notion of wanting to go back in time and not just stop the Sentinel program, but take one of our main characters, specifically Raven, because she's someone who we've seen as good and bad, so to speak, in the franchise, the movie franchise, and she is in the comic as well, more bad than good. But you see her as a character that can sort of, that goes in both directions. So I wanted the movie to be about not just trying to stop a bad guy, but trying to stop someone that our main characters all have relationships to. I mean, Wolverine has a relationship to her. Magneto has a sort of romantic relationship with her. Charles has a parental relationship with her, or a fraternal relationship with her, brother relationship with her when she's younger. So I wanted her to be the center of, and obviously Beast has a relationship with her. All of them have this really kind of specific emotional dynamic with her, and I wanted to be able to explore that in a way that would be central to the plot rather than be on the side of the plot. And so I thought that, it could be cool to make her, in some ways, the MacGuffin of the movie, the thing that everybody's going after in the film.
Now the way they're able to to absorb the abilities of their opponents kind of reminds me of Rogue's mutant powers. Was there any thought given to maybe like them getting, I don't know, was Rogue ever like a possibility as opposed to
Yeah, I thought about, yeah, I for sure I thought about it, but I felt like Rogue didn't have, again, I approach these movies very much from a character perspective, and I felt like Rogue in the movie franchise had close relationship to Wolverine from X1, and a close relationship with Bobby and Pyro, but Pyro's not really in this movie. I didn't feel as though she was as central to the Xavier Magneto confrontation. And that we had seen her as the MacGuffin in X1 as well. Remember, everybody's trying to get Magneto takes her in X1 to use her as part of his machine that's going to turn everybody into mutants at the end of X1. And so I felt like we'd kind of seen that before, and I didn't think it would be quite as emotional for the audience. And I also didn't know how to do just age. There's a lot of also issues about like age. So like if Kitty Pryde goes back in time and it's just her consciousness is going back into her younger body in 1973, is it 1973?
Yeah.
She's like, I don't know, 1 year old, or if she's even born. So I was like, I don't know if we have a 1 year old. Yeah, it's like it's like kind of like a baby being the protagonist of the movie. And similarly with Rogue, I felt like she's established really well with as Anna Paquin in the original cast, and so Anna's also really young, and so like Ellen Page, if you were to go back in time to 1976, which is what we really 1973 rather, which is what we really all kind of wanted. It was the era we all wanted to go back to. Again, you're looking at someone who's like a baby or a small child. And Wolverine, because he never ages, because he would literally be going back into a body that is the exact same body as the one he has in the future, it felt like, that would be the most natural person as well, because you have the same actor playing both parts. And it's justified because Wolverine in 2020, whatever it's meant to be, I forget, and Wolverine in 1976 is just got a different haircut.
Yeah, and that's one of the questions that I had for you. Like, so the original year in the comic for this storyline was 1980. I'm kind of curious, why did you guys land on 1973?
For some, a lot of different reasons. Felt like the 70s and the paranoia and the Nixon of it all was maybe a more interesting and a little bit more serious moment to explore. And the other reason is we all felt like we wanted to jump ahead 10 years in time, because we are dealing with Michael Fassbender, James McAvoy, Jennifer Lawrence. If you try to jump them 20 years ahead, which we did in Apocalypse, we kept jumping them ahead 10 years. If you jump them ahead 20 years, you've got to start to put prosthetics on Michael Fassbender and all of the characters and Nick Holt. And it's a bit of a harder pill to swallow that they still look, a couple years older, even though we're saying it's a decade later. If you say it's 20 years later, you're suddenly taking Jennifer from 20 years old to 40 years old. You're taking Michael Fassbender from 35 years old to 55 years old. Just some of the kind of logistics of casting real people as opposed to hand-drawn characters necessitated it.
I love that. Well, practically speaking, as you explained, Wolverine was the right choice to send. But like when you think about like who could be the worst person to send back in time in terms of like their temperament and probably where they were at in their life, it's also Wolverine. So it's this great, irony of sending him back. And he, of course, wakes up in this predicament that we're watching right now, which is very funny. But I am curious, did you always send him back to this moment, or were there different times that you had considered?
No, I always sent him back to this moment. I loved the idea that he sort of woke up as a rogue, that he was a guy who was, obviously before he joined the X-Men, and was like a bodyguard for, kind of crime guys. There's just something like kind of Serpico 1970s cool about it. I will say, and I like the idea of having bone claws, obviously, because it's pre Weapon X. A great contribution to the scene from Bryan Singer was putting him in a waterbed. That was not something that I wrote initially, but it's very 70s, and it provides that funny moment where his claws come out and he punctures the bed.
It's not an X-Men movie that Wolverine's slowly healing some wounds, and that is not a complaint. I love seeing that.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. Part of me will always wonder, though, how this scene would have turned out if it were his consciousness from the past and not like his future consciousness. Like, would it have turned out the same way, or would he just been like, "Hey, I'm sleeping with the boss's daughter, so what?"
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I actually think I think there would have been a fight. I don't know if he would have killed all those guys. It's pretty brutal, but he probably would have knocked them all out, not necessarily popped his claws, and then just skedaddled out of there.
Yeah, speaking of his claws, it is interesting that he has to go back to this particular point, as you said, pre-Weapon X, because he's significantly weakened in a lot of ways. Like they're not, bone claws aren't very effective against Sentinels.
No, they're not. And yeah, I mean, there's Chris Claremont, by the way. There's a lot of
Amazing.
Yeah, half the guys in that on the desk there are comic writers and artists. Yeah, it's a good cameo by Chris. Yeah, I mean, he is weakened, and that was also part of what we thought was kind of interesting, is making him a more vulnerable character. And obviously, the very end of the movie, not to jump ahead, but presuming people have probably seen this movie if they're watching this, some of that vulnerability is used against him by Magneto, by young Magneto, by Fassbender. And this is, I have to say, there was sort of one piece of brand new original casting in this movie, which is casting Boulevard Trask. And it was Brian's idea to cast. I mean, we're all very excited about it, but it was Brian's initial idea to cast Peter Dinklage, which I just thought was such an inspired, great idea. I'm a huge fan of his work, obviously. And he just brought so much to the character without having to do a whole lot. I mean, he's so still in this scene, and yet you just feel sort of reservoirs of resentment and genuine sort of fear of mutants.
What was there like a deeper reason as to why Peter Dinklage was chosen for this particular character?
No, I mean, it was that we think he's a great actor, and on the list of actors that we felt could bring a certain level of complexity to a character who could be kind of arch as a villain, we felt like, having seen him play interesting, complicated, watching Game of Thrones, there's a lot of awful things he does, and yet he's sort of delicious in doing them. We wanted to bring some of that to this.
Now, we are getting some questions from the fans. We have one for you, Simon. This one's from Adrian. He's in our YouTube chat right now. He says, "What X-Men characters were pitched but didn't make it into the movie?"
I mean, honestly, this movie has so many X-Men characters in it. I don't know. Off the top of my head, and also we made this movie a while ago, I don't remember any characters who were pitched who didn't make it, because so many of them made it into the future part of this. When you meet Blink and you meet Bishop and you meet some of these, Bishop is a big character, but Blink is not a huge character, and Warpath is somewhat of a big character, but they're not major X-Men characters. I mean, the character that I would say, interestingly, and this is probably a whole other conversation, and it's obviously a whole other cut of the movie, the character who was in this movie in a much more substantial way, but then we cut out of the movie, was Rogue. It was Rogue, as opposed to Kitty, who was at a certain point in the film holding on to Wolverine, and we cut her out of that part of the movie because it started to get confusing as to there were so many different reasons. But Anna, there's a solid sort of week of work, and if people want to watch the Rogue cut, they'll see what that cut looked like. And there's a whole subplot with Rogue where she goes off with Magneto and Bobby at some point that we cut out of the film. Partly because it's quite a long movie. I mean, is the reality too, and it's a long movie for a good reason, because there's so many characters and there's so much story to tell. But at a certain point, we felt like if there was a sort of a standalone subplot that could be lopped out of the movie without hurting its forward momentum or the characters or the emotion of the film, it had to go. And it was a hard decision to make, but we cut it and then we put it back in for a special cut of the film.
Yeah, big fan of the Rogue cut. Really like it.
Yeah.
Glad we got to see that. Speaking of other mutants, this scene has a ton. Is that Spike from X-Men Evolution in there?
Yes, it is.
Oh,
And that's what I'm saying. Like this movie is like, honestly, there are so many mutants in this film. I don't see how it kind of was a free for all as to like who are our favorite mutants that we can give cameos to, or we can bring in a meaningful way, because obviously some of them are brought in a more meaningful way. I mean, Toad there is you saw Toad in X1, but that's a sort of pre-Toad. We just we filled it with our favorites. Even though we have tons of characters.
What'd you say?
I said, even though we had tons of characters. I mean, even though it's like if I count off the main characters in this movie, it's like young Wolverine, old Wolverine, young old Magneto, Professor X, young and old, Raven, young and old, only young actually. It's a lot of characters to balance in a young Beast in a movie, and yet we still sort of tried to find places where we could insert our favorites. Sorry, what were you going to ask?
Spike. It looked like he got like some new powers in addition to just the spikes. So what was he doing to those poor soldiers?
Yeah, we gave him this power where he could sort of make them kind of dizzy, but it was the other character that made them vomit.
Yeah.
So he was able to give them a sort of dizziness from afar.
It looked very unpleasant.
Yeah, I mean, altogether, it was not a great time for those humans. This is one of my favorite scenes in the movie. Weirdly, I think I have to say one of the actors that I think is very underappreciated in this franchise is Nick Holt. I feel like he's done such wonderful work in every one of these movies, and he's sort of like the like Dennis Rodman. I mean, having just watched The Last Dance, Michael Jordan documentary, he's sort of like watching it over and over. He's sort of like the Dennis Rodman of the team, where like he doesn't fully get the appreciation of Scotty and Jordan, but he really, without him, he is kind of the glue of the at least the young cast. And I love this scene between him and Hugh. I just think Nick has really great comedy chops, and so does Hugh, obviously. And so the two of them together was a really fun dynamic to play.
Now, if you're just tuning in, guys, we're watching X-Men Days of Future Past with writer-producer of the film, Simon Kinberg. And if you want to sync up with us, we have a counter on the screen. So just go to that particular point in the movie. Also, we're taking your fan questions for Simon in the chat. I have a quick one here from Kylo Ren.
Okay.
Kylo Ren, guys.
That's amazing.
Kylo Ren says, what happened to Banshee?
It's a really good question. He's not in the movie, and for no good reason. There's a few characters from First Class, although I will say that Banshee is the only character from First Class who isn't in the movie, because Angel's not in the movie. The Zoe Kravitz version of Angel's not in the movie, and she's seen in an autopsy photo later. We had an idea about Banshee that we were going to use in the script. It was a sequence where a Sentinel, it was to show the power of the Sentinel, and it was a Sentinel in the past was Trask, instead of him actually doing a sort of demonstration, a sort of PowerPoint presentation that he does later for his buyers, he was actually going to show a video of mutants being chased in the forest and being killed by a Sentinel. One of his Sentinels, and Banshee was going to be that mutant, and ultimately that sequence got cut, and I couldn't find another place to sort of effectively insert him into the film that didn't just feel like we were sticking him in the film, because he's a really good actor and a cool character, and so I didn't want to just give him a cameo.
That made my heart drop.
I totally forgotten that sequence. I literally had forgotten that sequence until you just mentioned it. I mean, I wrote this, God knows, 10 years ago or something. So.
Wow. Gosh. I was going to say about a moment that we just saw here that made me so happy, but now I'm really sad.
I know.
But seeing Beast swinging upside down from his feet on a chandelier is like, mwah, I love it.
Yeah, well, we had Beast swinging upside down when we first met him in X-Men First Class, the young Beast, that is. This action sequence we try to have some fun. I mean, this movie is an interesting one because it's really dramatic and serious, obviously, in some ways. Stakes are very intense, and yet there's also a lot of humor in it. There's a little humor between Wolverine and Beast there. This is a very serious moment between him and Professor X. Professor X's story is a very serious story. But then there's also humor in probably the most famous sequence of this movie, which is the Quicksilver sequence, which is sort of a wildly delirious and kind of fun, playful sequence. So it was an interesting film in that it sort of surfed around the waves of different tones.
In the beginning, the Sentinels were just targeting mutants, and they began to identify the genetics in non-mutants.
Yeah, and here's some exposition from the great Hugh Jackman. A lot of really great actors in this. Ultimately, sometimes have to give us some expository dialogue, but we push past it pretty quickly and get into more character work. But the first 20 minutes of this movie or so there's a lot of characters, there's a lot of fun, and then there's a fair amount of here's the information you need baseline to start this movie.
Right. Now, Simon, I'm kind of curious. What are your thoughts on how Avengers Endgame kind of handled the rules of time travel? You know, since both these movies, that movie and this movie, you know, feel the need to kind of address the rules of time travel. Yet it seems like the MCU kind of just poked fun at pop culture's take on it, while like you guys are taking it more seriously in this one.
Well, I think the tone. I mean, I love Endgame. It's one of my favorite comic book movies of all time. It's for my sons. I have a 10 and 14-year-old boy. It's their favorite comic book movie, even though they know I had nothing to do with it, and that their dad had to do a lot of other comic book movies, though they haven't seen Deadpool and Logan yet. So I'll maybe I'll be able to catch up. But anyway, point being, because they're young for those movies, but the point being that I think what I was going to say is that the MCU's tone in general, with few exceptions, is a little bit more playful than the X-Men movies. I think the X-Men movies are a little bit more serious and dramatic in the same way that like the Dark Knight movies are much more serious and dramatic. And you could say that the Sony Spider-Man movies pre-MCU's involvement were definitely more comedic. So I think all of the different franchises, so to speak, that were created in the different sort of silos. Now they're all roughly together, but they were siloed off. And what we did with the X-Men movies was, try to create something that was a little bit more, I guess I would almost call it like operatic or dramatic, even bordering on melodramatic. Whereas the MCU movies are largely more fun and poppy and playful. Not that they don't have their serious moments too, and obviously Endgame has some very serious moments, but the way they handle time travel feels to me in line with the general tonality of their movies. Whereas I think for us, this fit more with the tone of what we do.
I'm of the mindset of I always take time travel seriously, so I mean it's not possible, obviously, in reality, but again, if it was, I'd take it seriously. That's just me.
Well, I mean, look, one of my favorite, honestly, for me also, in addition to just this being about X-Men, is my favorite time. I actually have a pretty good story about this, but my favorite time travel franchise or movie of all time are the Terminator films. I would say Terminator 2 is like a top 10 movie all time period for me. And I very weirdly, I'm remembering this now. There's a lot of stuff that I'm remembering because I haven't lived inside this movie in many years. But when we were in pre-production on this film, I flew from Montreal, which is where we shot this film, down to San Diego because 20th Century Fox was doing a sort of panel for all of their top employees, and they brought some filmmakers to do a panel, and it was two people who work in television and two people who work in film. The two people who work in TV were the guy that created Homeland and the guy who created Modern Family. It was an incredible panel. And then it was me, who like had no, didn't belong with the rest of them, and James Cameron. And I was backstage with James Cameron. I know people call him Jim, but to me, it's even weird to call him James Cameron. Anyway, I knew James Cameron was going to be in this panel with me, so I had this like fan book of Terminator 2 that I asked him to sign. I had brought with me from Montreal so that he could sign it. So we're backstage, and I'm like, I'm a huge fan of yours, and I'm doing this movie right now that's a time travel movie, X-Men Days of Future Past. And he was like, oh yeah, I know that movie, because there are actually some similarities, and if you do some deep diving into the internet, which I have a feeling you may have, there are people who have like, conspiracy theories that some of the Days of Future Past comic inspired in T2. Anyway, whole point of it is James Cameron writes in the book, "Dear Simon, don't fuck it up. Love, James." And we talked before this, that I think we get one F-bomb, and that's a good F-bomb to drop.
Yes.
James
Just like this
Cameron.
movie, you get one F-bomb.
Yeah.
That was perfect.
Yeah.
That's funny. That actually tees up the next fan question we have from Jonathan Frederick from our YouTube chat. He says, "Here's my question for Simon. What is your favorite 20th Century Fox film?" Since we're talking about,
Century Fox film period of any film ever.
I'm assuming he didn't. Yeah, that's all he said. So-
Golly, that's a lot of movies. I mean, actually, you know what I would say? That's actually a very easy one for me. Empire Strikes Back.
Oh wow.
Because the Star Wars movies were originally 20th Century Fox movies, so I'm gonna say Empire Strikes Back. Second place for me would probably be Sound of Music. So I also have lots of pretty diverse taste.
It's like two different sides of the spectrum there.
Yes, indeed. But Empire Strikes Back is an easy one for me because that's my favorite movie of all time. So it was nice. I would drive onto the Fox lot when I worked there for 15 years or so, and there's a huge soundstage that has a mural on it. Both of Sound of Music, actually, one has, but more. There was a mural from Empire Strikes Back that I would see every day driving in. It was pretty cool.
Someone who's up to no good.
Well, Raven in the comics, there's a whole, series of Raven comics where she's kind of like a thief, like a cat burglar. And I thought that would be a cool thing that we could use in a scene. And so this is sort of Mystique as cat burglar. And she would be a great cat burglar because that little thing she does right here with her thumb, she could get through any thumbprint, retinal scan. She could walk right past a security guard. She could become a security guard. And then there was this really nice little piece of dramatic tension of the secretary coming with the list. This is where she sees some of her former friends from X-Men First Class annihilated. Brutal. Yeah.
Are those any named mutants? Well, there's Azazel, right?
Azazel, yeah. Who's, as we know, her dad, but she never gets to learn that. And there's Zoe Kravitz. Really great score in this too. John Ottman is someone that Brian works with, the singer works with a lot, and John is the editor. He won Best Editing actually for in the Oscars for Bohemian Rhapsody. He's also the composer. It's a very rare combination to have somebody who's a picture editor and the composer of the movie. I don't think I've ever heard of another person like that. But it's cool because he's there's a pacing and a rhythm that comes with the music, from the music into the editing of the film, because he's in control of both. And this is a sequence. One of the characters I thought would be really fun to bring in and would bring a lighter tone is Quicksilver. And so this is a character I think who became very much a fan favorite after this film.
What's he done now? I'll just write you a check for whatever he took.
Evan Peters is just amazing as Quicksilver.
Yeah, he really inhabited this role brilliantly. And it's hard because I remember the first day that Evan this scene down here in the basement, which was a set on a soundstage. This was Evan's first day, and I remember Evan saying to me, "My God, like my first scene, and I'm in it with Hugh Jackman, James McAvoy, and Nicholas Hoult. I'm terrified, and yet you can't tell at all. He's so confident and cocky in the scene. He's really great."
I love how you guys show how his powers really affect like his personality, and how it seems like he easily gets bored, so he's like speeding between doing all these games and stuff. He's playing the arcade cabinet turned up on high. So I love how you really get a sense of how his powers affect him like that.
Yeah, I mean, for us, he was like an ADD kid, but like hyped up to a million. And so we wanted him to constantly be somebody who is bouncing around both literally and figuratively. And we just thought that would be a lot of fun for a character for him to play. And what Evan did, which was really interesting, is like he's talking fast and he's sort of hyper, but his energy is like not a super manic energy, because Evan himself is actually a very low key, mellow guy. And so I think there's something sort of interesting about him where he's like, see how he's like, not like his eyes aren't bouncing around all over the place. He's actually quite still, but the character is always thinking like 300 or 300 steps ahead of the other characters and zipping around quite literally. So yeah, no, we were really happy with what Evan brought to this movie, which was really special. And he's not in the movie for that long. I mean, that's the other thing that's kind of extraordinary. He's in a movie full of incredible actors playing cool parts, and he kind of stole the show.
I had a friend when we watched this. He was like, "Why didn't Quicksilver just stay with them? Why did he just go back home?" I was like, "He's a kid. I mean, was there any reason why he didn't just stay with them?"
Well, what you said is right. I mean, like, he's not one of the X-Men, you know? They're like using him for a very specific thing. But he is a kid with a life, and they're going into something that's really, I mean, obviously this is dangerous, but they're going something in something that's dangerous and also very personal for them. And so we felt like bringing him along would be kind of a distraction within the movie. For them, it would be a distraction. For the audience, to some extent, it'd be a distraction too. And we also felt like his tone, which is really fun and funny, would maybe detract a little bit from some of the serious stuff that comes from that point forward in the film.
And someone's got to go home and watch Wanda.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we made that a little more explicit at one point, and then cut back on it, and I can't remember why. But yeah, this was a really nice piece of the production design here. This whole thing was a cool scene. This was, you know, some of the fun also we played with the period of being able to show, you know, TV shows and stuff from another time.
And have selection, Sanford and Son.
Yeah. I mean, just the thing is, the Sanford and Son theme song is so great that we felt like it had a tone and a funness to it that was perfect for this. Yeah, this was all on a stage in Montreal. And coming up, actually, I won't spoil it, but you know, here's this moment between him and Magneto, who, as we know from the comics and the cartoons, is his father. It's not something that we resolve in any way in this movie, or really in later movies. But Michael Fassbender was very amused, entertained by Evan. He just thought he was really, really fun to play with. And something so different than what Michael usually does, because Fassbender is such a serious, dramatic actor. I think all the movies he's in are so dramatic, and he's so dramatic as Magneto. He was given a little bit of lightness in these scenes with Evan, and the scene coming up in the elevator is the scene I was going to talk about.
I love the score change here when the glass falls.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when we shot this and I was like, this isn't that big a deal. It's just glass falling. And then they made it kind of a cool deal with the music and the editing and the slow-mo and all that.
I think for me, it really kind of, well, Quicksilver's being silly up to this point, but it's like, oh, wow, he can really do some stuff. Like, that's an unexpected application for a speed power, right? You don't see that a lot. And then also it's like, it's unleashing Magneto, who's a bad dude, into the world. So I like that they punctuated it there.
Yeah, thanks. Me too. I mean, I think there's a lot of, you know, we try to do so much because a lot of these powers we've done before in other X-Men movies, not Quicksilver's, or have been done before in other superhero movies or superpower movies. We try to be as creative as we can with the powers. I mean, I think that's a big challenge of these films is how can you do something that you haven't seen before? And, you know, this is kind of bullet time from the Matrix, but it's its own thing. Now, this scene in the elevator, this is what I'm going to mention. There's like a million, not a million, but got to be 20, 30, 40 takes of this because it's just Evan completely improvising. I did not write a single line that's in this elevator. Maybe I wrote one line, but it's, you know, Evan talking about like, do you know karate, you know, and then Michael improvising back saying, I don't know karate, but I know crazy. All of it was just them like kind of just goofing off. And that's what I mean by like Michael Fassbender doesn't get to goof off in a lot of movies. And so this was we just sat back and let the camera roll and said, go again, go again, go again. And they just came up with different things every time. And then this is coming into what's, I guess, I mean, without question, the most, I guess, loved or famous sequence of this film.
Yeah, no, yeah, this scene with Quicksilver has instantly became a fan favorite, and it's gone on to be considered one of the best superhero action scenes ever put to screen. So yeah, please take the stage, please reflect on this and tell us how does it feel? What was it like bringing this together, and how does it feel looking back on it?
Well, it was really cool bringing it together. For me, again, because I really think about character. When I wrote this, it was much more about the reunion of Charles and Eric, and seeing Quicksilver stop time and seeing bullets slowly move through the air. But I didn't know, in my mind, I didn't really know what it would become, because truly, I would say this is a combination. The sequence is a combination of, there's so many people that work on a sequence that's this complicated, from the previs artist, which is the pre-visualization artist that's coming up with kind of the animated version of what this could be, to the second unit director, to the stunt coordinator, to the special effects coordinator, which isn't the visual effects coordinator, to visual effects. All these people are involved. And I would say this sequence is kind of wonderfully a real collaboration between all of the different groups that saw the possibility of what this could be. And as much as I would like to take credit for it, and take credit for the use of the song and that particular song, and just kind of all of the little details of it, like the tasting the soup, and it really, 10% of it was me, 20% of it was Brian, 10% of it was the previs artist. There's so many people involved, and I think that there was a sort of a love and a creativity and an inspiration that came from the potential of this. I mean, this notion of him running along the walls was something that Brian had the idea for. And I was like, I don't think that's his power, dude. He's super fast, but I'm not sure he can defy gravity. And Brian, talked me into it, and also had some sort of, relatively grounded physics understanding. If you move fast enough, you could do that. And it just all came together. And so I'm kind of, when I look at it, I think of each of the different little moments, and I remember each of the people who were responsible for coming up with those ideas. And that's what's kind of lovely about it, is that it's no one person's idea, which is the way you make movies. And sometimes, the way you make the best movies. You got hundreds of people who are involved, and tens of different department heads who are involved. And they can all have a little something and then you get an actor like Evan who comes up with that moment of stealing a hat, just as a punctuation mark. So at any rate, yeah, I mean, I really do love this sequence. When I hear this song randomly, on Pandora, it gives me a smile. And it's just one of those sequences that worked from the first time we ever saw it cut together. And it was complex.
I was going to ask that. Whose idea was it to choose Jim Croce for this? I'm a huge Jim Croce fan, so I'm just kind of curious. And again, kudos to you guys. You used him as well in Logan. Don't think I didn't notice that in the gas station scene.
Wow. So. Deep cut. Nicely done. In my memory, it was our previs team's idea. They put it in the previs, and we all kind of were we kept using different songs and didn't have the same effect. And finally, that was a song that stuck in the film. Yeah, it was, again, people that they're not in the head title credits. They're not people whose names you guys would know. But when you watch the end credits and there's thousands of people's names who are scrolling by, a whole lot of them had a lot to do with that sequence.
Well, they have exponential.
I'm not a fan of his work. I like it in this context, but I can't say that I rock out to it when I'm at home by myself.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this upcoming scene, and you're right. It would not work if Quicksilver was in there, eating airplane peanuts and being silly and stuff.
Yeah.
Because this is where it gets a little real.
Yeah, this is where it gets really dramatic and ideally emotional. And these actors. One of the things that's so great about, I think, this franchise has nothing to do with me, is that these actors are extraordinary. Oscar-nominated, Oscar-winning actors. You get, Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen, Ellen. There was a moment, obviously, Michael and James as sort of as the and Jennifer, I would say, as the anchor of the of that younger cast. And like I said, Nick Holt, who I think is an undervalued part of it. This was really dramatic and really hardcore. But there was a moment when we were shooting a scene in the future, part of Days of Future Past, and the scene was Anna Paquin at the time, Ellen Page, Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen, Hugh Jackman, Halle Berry. I think that was it. And all of them, but I think Patrick was the only one who had not been nominated or won an Academy Award. And they were all like making fun of him for not having won an award. And they were also talking about how the women were so much better than the men because Halle won. Ellen got nominated, didn't win. Anna had won Best Actress. And the guys had just been nominated but not won. And so they were like, you guys are slacking a little bit. You're bringing the general quality of this franchise down. But you get these great actors and you want to write great scenes for them, you want to see Michael Fassbender go full Michael Fassbender. And this is one of those scenes where he got to.
No, absolutely. When he's listing the names of like the fallen mutants and that's heart-wrenching. And also just like seeing what happens when Magneto, the master of magnetism, gets angry on a plane. Like that's good. As a person who has a fear of flying, that was terrifying.
Yeah, I'm also a person that at the time had a fear of flying, so it was terrifying. And we were, obviously we're shooting on the ground, but we were shooting in the fuselage of a cabin of a real plane, private plane, and it just was like cramped and awkward. I would say this is very Bryan Singer. This like disco 70s, like really taking advantage of the period. He was really good at that. And we got to play some of the interesting politics of the time, being at the end of the Vietnam War and the notion that, one war had ended and a new one was about to begin. Not literally about to begin, but in mutant terms about to begin. And in human terms, a real war had just ended. And so that was something that we explored. Hopefully didn't exploit, but just explored. And this, I think, is a great scene for Jennifer.
Go ahead, Akeem.
I was just going to remind people, if you're just tuning in, we're watching X-Men Days of Future Past with writer-producer of the film, Simon Kinberg. And if you want to sync up with us, of course, you guys know that there's a counter right there on the screen. So just go to that particular point of the movie. And please keep sending in your fan questions. Joshua, I have a fan question, if you don't mind.
The fans can go before me.
Okay. Well, this one's from Paulina Enoch. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your last name. She's on our Cinefix YouTube channel. She says, Simon, what characters or character do you wish you could have done differently and why?
In this movie, it's an interesting question. I mean, I'm really proud of this movie. It's my favorite of the X-Men movies, the mainland X-Men movies, to be honest. Let me think that through and see if I can answer it. I think probably, when I thought all the actors were so good, if anything, I wish we had more time to spend in the future. I feel like, and in that, I would say, the character that really springs to mind for me is Storm. Storm is a character who I feel like is one of my favorites from the comics, and I feel like doesn't have the same prominence in the movies that she has in the comics. And in the future part of this film, we got Halle, who's an extraordinary actress, and for most of the movie, she's kind of standing guard. And so I would say, toward the end, she has some battle sequences, but there's not enough emotional character work that we did with Storm in this movie. And in truth, I wrote more. I wouldn't say that it was great, but I wrote more. We shot it. There was a scene between her and Bishop, Omar Sy. But it was a scene that was sort of just talking about, them being ready for war and what war meant to them. It was a sort of philosophical scene more than it was a character emotional scene. And so it dropped out. A movie that was 2.5 hours long, it dropped out of the film. And so, yeah, as I think about it, in general, I didn't, you have people like Ian and Patrick and the people I just listed. Obviously, you want to be able to spend as much time as possible with them. But this was really the younger generation's film in terms of the body of the movie. And specific from that future cast, it would be Storm.
Okay.
Oh wow, that would have been great though. No, I actually personally love like the philosophy talk. Like I do love a good action scene, don't get me wrong, but when a character gets to like share their truth, their personal truth, that is always the best part.
Yeah, and I think I could have written that better. In truth, I think that what I ended up writing was something that was more two people talking about war as like a concept, as opposed to feeling, because they're strangers. It's hard to have an intimate conversation or really personal conversation sometimes with a stranger that you have no history with, whereas these other characters have so much dense history with each other. I mean, this scene that we're watching now between Charles and Eric is like, I think one of the showcase scenes of the movie, because of how much history these characters have with one another, because of the things that are said between the lines and the lines themselves. And you have extraordinary actors. So it's harder to do with two people who are essentially strangers, even if they have either similar or entirely opposing viewpoints about war. And in the case of Bishop and Storm, they had very similar viewpoints. But it just kind of felt like a scene between two people that don't have much emotional history agreeing on something, which is not always the most dramatic.
Yeah.
No matter how good the actors. And those are two extraordinary actors.
Well, speaking of two characters that have a history with each other, seems like you guys kind of tried to rewrite history by saying that JFK is a mutant. So I'm kind of curious about that. Let's explore that. Like, what would his mutant power be? You guys kind of just glossed over that line. I want more.
Over it. I mean, we didn't spend much time on it in the movie, but we definitely spent a lot of time thinking about it and talking about it. And I mean, look, one thing that we did talk a lot about when I came up with the line was, is it insensitive? Because we obviously didn't want to. In one of the things we do with this film and X-Men First Class, these two movies especially, is we sort of create this hidden, buried history. It's not an alternate history because it still fits within our historical timeline, right? Like the Cuban Missile Crisis and X-Men First Class did happen. We're just saying it was stopped a different way. All of this is where it starts to diverge. This movie starts. This is an actual conference that did happen at the end of Vietnam. But anyway, with JFK, I don't know what his mutant power would be. But one thing that we did talk about is that family is extraordinarily powerful. The Kennedy family, obviously. Yep. They are somewhat mysterious, and a lot of tragic things have happened to that family in somewhat mysterious ways. And so we felt like in a universe that is a comic book universe, if you were ever going to take a family that's a real life historical family, it does feel like the Kennedys are sort of our Wayne family, as in Wayne Manor family. Yeah. So yeah, we took it somewhat seriously, but we didn't really get into the nitty gritty of if JFK could fly or read minds. And this, like I said, was originally, when you were asking me about, or someone was asking about Banshee, this, instead of this presentation that Trask is doing here on this little briefcase, the film was going to be Banshee, and I forgot who else, somebody else, maybe Zoe's character, running in the woods, being chased by a sentinel. And at a certain point, we actually did run out of money because this big budget movie, and the actors got paid a lot, and it's got massive scale to it.
I do believe Banshee's busted suit shows up later, so he does kind of make it in there. He's acknowledged.
Good call. Yes, he does. Yeah.
This is great.
Yeah, I like this scene. There were a lot of jokes about what that little tracker looked like in real life, but leave them up for your viewers. Yeah, no, this was a cool scene, and a really nice one for Mystique, for Jennifer.
Yeah, I do have a question about this because, you know, when we meet her in first class, she's, I think she's got as much combat prowess as, like, I don't know, you or me,
Right.
maybe a little more. But when she comes out here, she is like a kung fu master doing all this stuff and flips and kicks and stuff. We never learned where all that came from, but did you guys talk about that at all? Like, where does she get these insane skills from?
Well, where we did talk about it. You know, 10 years have obviously transpired since the last one. And we imply that we don't imply, we say in that scene that you just saw, that we know at the end of X-Men First Class, she goes off with Magneto to sort of start the first brotherhood of mutants. And the notion is that she trained under Magneto, who himself, you know, had some semblance of training, and that they had sort of were building the brotherhood when Magneto got grabbed around the JFK assassination. And so that gives them, I can't do the math, but at least a couple of years for her to start her training. And then presuming that, you know, she was upset about the fact that Magneto was unjustly, those are flashes of obviously other movies, Weapon X, Brian Cox, that she had been training with Magneto, and that past Magneto, she continued her training because now she knew she was in a dangerous world, and she was right, because here she is. And if not for the intervention of this crazy time travel plot, she either would have been killed or had to kill here. And this is a very complex scene because all of the different characters have different agendas. And then this moment is one of my favorites in terms of how Magneto can bend the bullet to direct it down into her. This was something I was really proud of, because with all candor, there's, you know, a few things in this movie that are stolen from bullet time in the Matrix, but that felt unique. That felt like bending bullets with your magnetic power was a little bit different than what we'd seen before. And I liked this notion of his sort of popping in and out sometimes. This is really well directed by Brian. And this little moment's one of my favorites, where he just does this. Snap. I love that. I mean, it's like little things like that in terms of using their powers that I think are so cool, because they're just logical, you know, they're sort of real world. I mean, my other favorite of the X-Men movies is X2. I think X2 is such a masterpiece, and so a lot of those flashes are ones that I have a lot of affection for.
This is the hardest moment to watch for me. The thought of getting dragged by a bullet in your leg.
Pretty intense. Yeah, it's wild.
Gets me every time.
Yeah, no, I like it. I like it a lot too. And again, it's like, you know, Magneto's he has such a specific power for someone who's so powerful. Meaning, like, usually when you have a supervillain, the supervillain of a franchise, it's like, you know, they just have kind of every power. It's sort of all encompassing instead of something as specific as they can move metal. And so we tried to find creative ways that he could use that power. And I love what Brian and our cinematographer, Tom Siegel, who's an incredible cinematographer. He did Three Kings. He did Drive. He most recently did Spike Lee's new movie. He's just a really talented guy. I love the way he used different kinds of film in this movie. We shot this on with 3D cameras, but every now and then he would go into, you know, old 16 millimeter or whatever, to make it feel like it was of the period. I thought that was really clever of him and Brian. Actually, both of them have a cameo on this. Let me see if I can make this bigger so I can tag the moment where our DP has his cameo. I'm watching for it now. See how that's different? That's different.
I love that. Yeah.
Different film stock and. Okay, so Bryan Singer has a cameo that's going to be really obvious. That's our DP right there. Mystique turns into our DP when he has the hat on. That's Tom Siegel. And then Brian soon has a cameo as well. There's a whole lot going on in this sequence.
Hold on tight. We'll get through this together.
I remember when I first saw this scene, and I saw the people that were recording Mystique as she was walking across the street. I was thinking like, oh, hurry up and upload this. Get all the views on YouTube. 1973.
Oh, I have a question. That look right there that he gives Wolverine's claws, what is he thinking there?
He's thinking of like what they could do, like what his powers are, and what he could do as a soldier, as a warrior. Because at the end of the movie, well, you'll see that's our DP. That was Bryan Singer that's Brian in the foreground there with the camera. Bryan Singer. It was just a thought about what he could do with him as a soldier if weaponized. Sort of the beginnings of Weapon X.
Gotcha.
He breaks loose. So I'm just waiting for my full-on Brian cameo. Ellen's really incredible in this movie too, and she doesn't have a lot to do, but she's just so real as an actor.
Yeah.
Always,
Did we talk about her powers yet? Because I had a question about that too, of how normally her power is just to walk through walls, like phase through walls, but now she can phase through time. So did she get like a secondary mutation or something between movies?
That is the only way one could explain it. That there are secondary mutations, and that yes, it is her secondary mutation between movies, and between movies would have been many years of actual time, not movie of movie time, not actual time. Let me see if I can make this smaller again. There's our Nixon.
What the hell are we dealing with here? Off the record.
I mean, one of my other favorite action sequences, you mentioned the Quicksilver sequence. My favorite sequence, other than the Quicksilver sequence, I guess, would be the Nightcrawler sequence at the beginning of X2 in the White House. I thought that was so extraordinary. So anytime I see the Oval Office in a X-Men movie, I think of that opening sequence in X2.
That one is definitely spectacular. What you can do with teleportation, it was just so great. Actually, that maybe in this movie, Blink, I think, is a standout of the future New Mutants, just because the way she uses teleportation is so different and so fun and cool.
Yeah, it is, and the actress, it's imaginative, so it's like it's just visually something we haven't seen before. And I have to say that I think came from a conversation in my memory with Brian, and he said, I want to see mutants who have powers that are just visually very different than what we've done before. And Blink offered an opportunity to do that because of teleportation, sort of wormholes she creates for people to leap through into other spaces. And then we got the actress Fan Bingbing, who is one of the most famous, if not the most famous actress in China, to come and play the part. So it was really interesting. And it was a very international cast between our American and British primary cast, and then bringing in Omar from France and bringing in Bingbing from China. It became a really cool sort of collision and coalition of worlds.
Now, we still have some more questions coming in from the fans watching across our multiple platforms that we're streaming on. This one is coming from Sainu.com on our Cinefix YouTube page. And this person says, as a writer, do you believe killing your darlings is a good idea for sequels? Specifically, beloved fan favorite characters.
Not necessarily. I mean, I think that if the story leads you there and it's the most dramatic thing you can do for the other protagonists, the other main characters in the story, it could be great. But, killing someone like Mystique in Dark Phoenix, for me, became a powder keg for so many of the other characters in the movie. And, you know, I don't think it's necessarily a good thing as a rule. I just think, if it can sort of incite or inspire your other characters into a deeper, sort of heavier emotionality, it's great. But you have to be careful because obviously you don't want to kill characters like what happened in X-Men: The Last Stand as an example with Charles. I think to lesser extent it happened with Raven in Dark Phoenix. You don't want the audience to be so disappointed that they've lost one of the reasons they came to see the movie.
Yeah.
Is also one of my favorite scenes in the movie because you rarely have face-to-face one-on-one scenes between Jennifer and Michael, and you have two of the best actors of our time together stuck in a phone booth. So as a writer, that's a lot of fun to write because it's just 3-4 pages of dialogue.
This is a great stretch of the movie for Jennifer Lawrence. That scene we just had with the nurse, that was such a quiet, sad moment. Just reminding you, that mutants are hated and feared. And then we get this scene where she gets to really let them know how she feels.
Yeah, that last scene, it's nice. I'm glad you mentioned that because that's one of those scenes that I would say I probably fought the hardest to keep in the movie because it's such an easy scene to lop out because it's purely, like you say, a quiet character scene. It doesn't push story forward. It doesn't even necessarily push your character forward, but it does remind and make the audience feel what these movies are about, which is ultimately persecution and oppression. And you feel the real persecution of what it is to be a mutant, especially a mutant like Raven, who can quote unquote pass in the world, where it's harder for some of the other mutants, whether if they have gills or they have, blue skin or all the time. She's someone who can move in and out of her powers and in and out of anybody's identity. And so it felt like she was the best person to express that feeling of the world hates us and they don't even know when they're telling us they hate us.
I'm so glad you fought for that. That's one of my favorite scenes in the movie. It's a short one, but it's perfect. It's so good.
And Jen's an extraordinary actress. I mean, she's one of my favorite actors in the world. She's a close friend, and I think she's good at so many things. She can be have really big scenes like her famous scene in Silver Linings Playbook where she has the beer, and she can have really small, subtle scenes like the one we're talking about, and she just has the facility to be able to do those different things, and that's a little scene that I love.
Now that we're back at the X Mansion, it's my understanding, Simon, that you actually have a little something in your home that has to do with the X Mansion.
I do. We're in my office right now, so I have to unplug my computer and walk you around to show it to you, but I can show it to you without revealing too much of my office, I think. This is all, I brought X-Men stuff down here. That's my son with a clapper on Apocalypse. This was
wow.
This here was the for Dark Phoenix. They made this Dark Phoenix Day in Los Angeles from the mayor. This is one of my favorite. This is my favorite Stan Lee cameo we've ever done. This is Stan in Deadpool 1 as the DJ in the strip club. And this was from my DP on Dark Phoenix. This is something from Star Wars. This was actually a Dark Phoenix doll that Joe Jonas, Sophie Turner's husband, gave me. But to answer your question, this is actually a model from the production team, the actual model we used to build the X Mansion.
Wow.
Yeah, there you go.
That is amazing.
Yeah, we have done I think so the exterior of the X1 mansion was in Toronto. The exterior of the X2 and some of the interior of the X2 mansion and X3 Mansion was in Vancouver. The exterior of the X-Men First Class Mansion was in the countryside of England, and the mansion in Apocalypse and Days of Future Past and Dark Phoenix was all in Montreal. So they've been all over the world, and if you actually watch the movie, they're always slightly different, which nobody seems to actually have issue with, but they are all different. Also in the Deadpool movie, Deadpool 2, no, Deadpool 1. I mean, it's in both movies, but in Deadpool 1, that's the Montreal one as well. Anyway, point being, that was the model for all of the Montreal X mansions, and I keep it here. I do actually keep it here in my office. I pulled out some of those other things, knowing that we were doing this today, like that clapper. Yeah, it's cool.
That is an awesome shelf piece. Thank you for sharing that.
Happy to. Finally,
you showed us a few items from Dark Phoenix. There's a guy on Twitter. He goes by the name Release the Kinberg Cut. And this isn't really a question. It doesn't seem like it's just this. I guess he's just exclaiming this. He says, "Nice way to watch the movie today. And for Dark Phoenix, we want your original vision, and we will support it every time." Hashtag Release the Kinberg Cut.
I do appreciate that. You know, it's a hard one to answer, other than thank you for your support. I appreciate that. And you know, the movie that we released was ultimately, I would say, my vision for the film. That vision did change over the span of making the movie, and there are other scenes that we shot, just as in this movie. There are a lot of other scenes that we shot that we didn't end up using. There are scenes that we shot and an ending of that film that was quite different than the ending that was the theatrical release. To release what he's talking about, it wouldn't just be like we would splice those scenes back on. Those scenes were never completed because of visual effects and sound and all of the technical aspects that go into completing, especially movies of this scale. So it would take a whole lot of work, but I appreciate the support. And you know, with every movie, there are things that you wish you did differently. On every movie, there's things that you thought were great and perfect, and then you watched them and you didn't think they were as strong as you had imagined, and you go a different way. But that you know, Dark Phoenix was a hard movie because in its initial concept, when I wrote it, to begin with, it was meant to be a 2-part film. And then it suddenly became a 1-part movie for reasons that weren't of my doing. And so, you know, having to create around that massive change was its own challenge on a movie itself that was challenging, because all of these movies are obviously uniquely challenging.
And just to clarify, there's a lot of people that have been asking this and just like really rallying around a Dark Phoenix extended cut. So it wasn't just that one guy. Just to let you know. So you do have some supporters out there for sure.
No, trust me. Listen, I have the internet too, so I'm well aware, and I look at your site when I'm not on your site. So and plenty of other sites like it. None as good, but plenty of other sites like it, and I also have Instagram. So I appreciate all of that love and support. And, you know, like I say, it is something that, you know, as you're making a film, especially as a writer, when you start writing something, it's never the same as when you conceived it. And then even as a director, when you make the film, it's not exactly the same as what you shot. And in that case, it's probably more significantly different. But ultimately, you know, I was happy with the cut that we released, and obviously shot and edited and completed the cut that we released, you know. So, yeah. I mean, even this movie it was not on Days of Future Past. It was a very complicated and a very difficult decision to excise Rogue out of the movie. And you were talking about earlier how you like the Rogue cut, and I like the Rogue cut too, but it's a 20-minute longer cut on a 2.5-hour movie. And I think we as fans love the road cut as an example. But maybe for a mainstream audience on this film, the road cut was maybe 20 minutes too long or 15 minutes too long or whatever it was. And they wanted to kind of keep the main storyline pushing forward, and not go on a detour that kind of just looped them back to the main storyline, which is what the rogue, the major part of the road cut does. But it's a great sequence. And interestingly, on this, Anna was the first actor. She had an availability issue. And so we shot her first. So all of the stuff that's in the, so to speak, road cut was stuff that we shot in the first 2 weeks of filming. So it had lived in the film the longest, because as you shoot a film, it gets edited by the editor daily. So we'd seen those road cut scenes from the first week of filming. And this was a long movie to film. These are all long movies to film. They're like, 80, 90 days of first unit photography. And then probably another 40, 50 days of second unit photography. We have a first and second unit on these films. So, you're talking about 100+ days of shooting, and you're living with the 10 days of the road cut. We were living with the 10 days of the road cut for the following 80, 90 days.
I have to tee up this scene right here because I want to hear what you have to say, but this is the most special moment of the movie for me, because you have these two amazing casts of the past and the future, but Wolverine's the only one who can really live in both worlds. But you created this excellent, beautiful sci-fi moment where the old and young Professor X's can talk. So how did you come up with that?
Well, that is the old and young Professor X's was something that Bryan Singer brought to the movie. Like I said, I'd written it for Matthew Vaughn, and Bryan read the script, and Bryan and I spent weeks together with Jason Taylor, who was one of the producers of the film as well, and worked for Bryan, and was a wonderful resource and a great guy. We spent a long time sitting. We were in New York at the time. And we rented out some rooms, and we just sit all day long working on the script. And this came out of that process, this notion of what would happen if we could bring young Charles into the future, and you had a Charles and Charles scene. And I initially resisted it because I thought the physics of it were so paranormal that I didn't believe it. And then once we started talking about it, I felt like, you know what, I don't care about the physics anymore. It's just such an incredible fan moment.
Yeah. And
it's such an incredible emotional moment. And this notion that the older, I can get emotional thinking about it. And this is my favorite scene in the movie. It's one of my favorite scenes I've ever written. It might be my favorite scene I've ever written. But it was James McAvoy's first day of photography, by the way, because we worked with the original cast first, and then we transitioned to the first class, the newer cast, and James was the fulcrum. He was a handoff from old cast to new cast, let's say. And we shot this, and it was James's literally first day of filming, and he's so incredible in it. But Bryan and I came up with this idea. I loved it, or came to love it, wrote it, and then I remember as we got closer to shooting it, everybody was so excited to shoot it, obviously, because it is such a special, unique thing that only in a movie like this could you do. The scene wasn't fully there yet. I hadn't really delved into what it would mean emotionally to have a moment when you're really struggling as a young man to talk to your older self who'd been through it and could help you back, or could help you, period. And I remember I had to fly. We were shooting in Montreal. I had to fly to LA over a week. I didn't have to. I flew to LA over a weekend to see my children, and I hadn't seen them in a long time because they were in LA doing their stuff, and I was in the airport lounge about to fly back to Montreal, and we were shooting this a day or two later, and it was, I think, just in seeing my kids and feeling what it is to be a father, seeing kind of the younger version of yourself, and wanting to impart some wisdom to them and wanting to promise them that it was going to get better, this sort of scene came to me in a more fulsome way. And I wrote it in that lounge, and sent it to James and Patrick, with whom I was close as friends, and to Brian. And then I got on the plane, and back then there was no internet in the planes. And so I got off the plane and got emails from all of them saying, this is the scene. And so we went off and shot it. And it was one of those scenes that everybody was silent in the crew that day. And they were so good that really there were takes where I remember Brian and I looking at each other with tears in our eyes, because they were just so great as actors.
Wow, I believe it. So we got Professor X talking to Professor X. Did you ever have any ideas about other characters somehow, through some weird reason, being able to interact with their past or present self?
No, because we felt like if we started to do it too much, it would take the specialness away from the Charles moment. And we felt like the center of this world, both in the comics and the cartoons and the movies, is Professor X. He may not be the protagonist, meaning like it may be Wolverine's movie sometimes, it may be someone else's movie other times, but he is always the sort of thematic core of the film, and he's the sort of philosophical touchstone of the film. And so we felt like he was the character that we wanted to do that with, and to do it with someone else, even though it'd be incredible to have a scene between Ian McKellen and Michael Fassbender, or a schizophrenic scene between Hugh Jackman and Hugh Jackman, like that Mark Ruffalo show that's on right now, would be super cool. But it just felt like, we had figured it out with Charles, and he was the right one to do it with.
Good call.
Yeah, no, I think it was too. The one of the challenges of that scene, not challenges, but one of the things that came out of that scene, or controversies or conflicts, was that the studio wanted to end, I think it was the first trailer, with the Charles moment. I think he says, Charles, we need you to hope again. And we really didn't want to blow it. We didn't want to give it away. But then they showed us the trailer, and it was so emotional, ending with the two of them, and so intriguing, that we were like, screw it, like, go ahead, put it in the trailer. It's going to get out there anyway. And it's not, we weren't giving the scene away. So at any rate, it ended up in the trailer. And this was another, use of Charles's power you hadn't fully seen yet, in the other films, like him being able to bounce around heads and voices in a crowd. We felt was something cool that we could play with. It's that character, that actor always cracks me up. I don't know why. There's something about him that I'm like, hey, that guy's a mutant.
The girl I grew up with wasn't capable of killing. She was good.
And they all did a pretty good job of seeming kind of like zombified Charles. Like their brains had been taken over.
Shut her down, Charles. Get in her head. She's not letting me in. I'm barely holding on. I'm not strong enough yet.
And then this is as close as he can get to getting inside her head.
I know what Trask has done.
He can't control her mind, but he can.
Him will not bring them back. It will set you on a path from which there is no return. And end the cycle of killing us and them till there is nothing left. But we can stop it right now, you and I. You just have to.
But like I say, time travel movies are not fun to write, because you have so many paradoxes and so many questions that could be asked. And I think, in truth, if you don't get it right, and by that I don't mean the physics of it. I think what I mean by that is if emotionally it doesn't resonate, then all of a sudden you expose the sort of illogicalities of the fact that time travel is essentially impossible, or at least as our minds can cognize it now. So, if you're not in it emotionally as an audience member, you start poking holes in the logic of it, And I think that was the challenge of this film. The challenge was making sure the audience really cared all the time, or when they were meant to care, mostly. This was a Brian thing. Brian loves Star Trek, and he wanted to use a Trek illusion there.
All three. Wow.
Yeah. And PBS.
And this is the scene you were talking about before.
And PBS.
Yeah.
Just so you guys know, if you're just now tuning in, we're watching X-Men Days of Future Past with writer-producer of the film, Simon Kinberg. And again, if you guys want to sync up with us, there's a counter right there on your screen. So just go right on ahead and sync up with us. And of course, keep asking your questions so we can answer them. We actually have one from the IGN chat here from Matt. I believe it's Samas. Matt Samas. He says, "Can you please give us some insight on what happened to Emma Frost between First Class and Days of Future Past?"
I was going to ask this as well because she's like one of my favorite characters, so I'm very eager to hear what you have to say. Good question, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, the notion is that there are mutants that have been, especially since Magneto's been away, and she was part of the Brotherhood as well at the end of X-Men First Class. There are mutants, sadly, while Magneto was gone, who were hunted and killed in a world where mutants are persecuted. And even assassinated. And earlier, that scene that you were talking about that you like, and I do too, when Fassbender, when Magneto is on the plane and he's listing off the people who've been killed, Emma's one of them that he lists off. So I don't really have the backstory or the specifics, if I'm being honest, of how she was killed. But the notion is that they were living in a time when, and there are plenty of corollaries today that we could point to, and there are even more corollaries probably in the 70s or in the 50s or in centuries past of peoples who, because they were different, were persecuted and killed with impunity. So that was the idea.
Gosh, I was so excited to hear the answer, but the truth really hurt. But this is a great scene.
Somewhere she's on an island. She's like living a good life.
That's what I wanted to hear. Okay, good. She's on her diamond form, catching some sun. Yeah.
Exactly. She's in a James Bond movie. She's like the perfect Bond woman. She's living her best life.
But this scene is great. We were talking about it earlier. Oh yeah, there's the Angel's wing, right? And busted suit.
Yep.
And his helmet looks a little different. He did a little redesign on the helmet.
Yeah, good call. You are correct. We did. The notion is, because we talked about were there people that would notice that, and you have proven that we were right. There were people that would notice that. That Magneto between X-Men First Class and 1963, when he would have been grabbed, redesigned his helmet. So he himself did a little redesign on it to make it, a little cooler.
I did appreciate the comics accurate horns on the other one.
Yeah,
First Class. I like this one a lot.
Yeah, look, I appreciated that too. It wasn't up to me. I was really both Matthew's choice in First Class and then Brian's choice in this movie as the director. But I'm not sure how if you would have wanted to live for an entire third act with Magneto with the little antennas on top of his helmet, where if for a global mainstream audience they would have been like, this is seeming a little silly. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to think of Michael Fassbender as being silly, so maybe it would have worked. This is a scene I like too. In my memory, I think this may have been a reshoot. This scene, the scene between the two of them, because we felt like we wanted one final moment of connection between them before sort of quiet before the storm. And the storm is now coming in the future.
There's 12 carriers inbound, 10 miles. They found us.
There's one moment, and I don't remember where it is in this movie, but I think it's somewhere around here, where the pillars in there are mirrored. They have mirrors, and we only realized very late that in one of the mirrors we have from the Rogue cut, Rogue actually in the mirror instead of Kitty. It's a really deep cut unintentional Easter egg, completely accidental Easter egg, and we were like, you know what? It's taken us this long to notice it. We don't think an audience is going to notice it. No audience seems to have noticed it, or at least talked about it. I haven't gone that deep into Reddit on this, but yeah, we just left it. We were like, you know what? It's actually kind of cool. It's if they notice, it's cool, and most people won't notice, and that's fine.
Oh wow. Okay, hidden rogue Easter egg. There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, look for her in the mirror of one of those pillars. You will see it. We didn't even like make it more dusty or hidden. We just left it as is.
Should have made him come with us.
Thought this was a cool effect that Brian created.
Cigarette.
Haven't found her yet, but she has to be here. President of the United States.
I think I'm getting kind of like, with this quarantine lack of haircut, a sort of Wolverine thing happening. I'm just thinking like I have a sort of 70s Wolverine cut happening.
Give yourself the horns. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I kind of
You can rock that look.
kind of feel like I have them.
They're coming in. Yeah.
Yeah, they're disturbing and yet also exciting about this.
We have prepared for this threat. In the immortal words of Robert Oppenheimer, behold, the world will never be the same again.
Every now and then, like the internet just gives you little gems like that. I will say, as a writer, that Robert Oppenheimer quote is about obviously the atom bomb, and I was just sort of searching around for cool quotes about the atom bomb. And then the creator of the atom bomb gave me the coolest possible quote because there it was. Love this little scene.
Yes.
Just such a weird little moment. And this actually was a very late in the process idea of Brian's, which is that Magneto would lift RFK Stadium and use it and drop it on the White House. Originally, he just attacked with. He turned the Sentinels on the humans and attacked with them. And then we were making the movie, and he felt like it just wasn't big enough, didn't have enough scale and like kind of grandeur to it. And I remember Emma Watts, who again was sort of, I think she was president of production, and Jim Giannopoulos, who at that point was the chairman of Fox, came to visit Montreal. And Brian had created this presentation, and we brought them into, I think it was his trailer, and pitched them this notion of RFK Stadium becoming the sort of centerpiece of the third act or of the finale. And I remember them saying, wow, this is really cool. This is awesome. And then Jim Giannopoulos, who was really the boss, would have to pull the trigger on it, said, how much is this going to cost? And Brian was like, not that much. Like, I don't know, like $2 million, $3 million. And he was like, oh, okay. Let me think about it. I mean, it's definitely cool. Let me think about it. And he left, and we didn't know if it was going to make it into the movie. And to his credit, that's a little Jean Grey shout out. That's meant to be young Jean Grey.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. But he let us do it, and I think there's some really striking imagery, obviously.
Yeah. I feel like at this point, it's not an X-Men movie unless Magneto lifts something
That's right.
monumental. So I thought it was an epic moment seeing that.
Yeah, but you're right though. Like we definitely got in that place where it was like he was lifting, missiles in the last movie. He was lifting what did he do? A bridge in Last Stand, and he is constantly lifting things. And this is definitely the coolest thing he lifted. And it was the best photograph too. Like I thought everybody involved, from the visual effects guys to Brian DP, our second unit directors, they all did a great job with it.
So I have to ask how the Sentinels, those old school purple Sentinels, like, did you talk about well, we love the Sentinels as a comic book fans, but there's obviously a logic gap between what would happen in reality. Like, how would all those military generals be convinced that, yeah, these giant robots will be an effective, good idea?
We didn't really talk about it in those terms, but we did say, we are going to have to make all of this kind of serious enough, and the threat serious enough, that we believe that they would turn to something this seemingly absurd. And so I think that showing the mutant threat early on in the movie and Trask's ability to convince Nixon that the only way that they were going to actually survive it is to come up with something that itself is sort of not paranormal, because obviously they're machines, but, somewhat paranormal because they're robots, flying robots. So that was our idea was if you make the motivation for them serious enough, the actual solution can be goofy, so to speak. Because yes, it would be very difficult. I mean, even though we have a president today who's, talking about Space Force and Star Wars and things that you just feel like are science fiction because he lives in a science fiction world, you do want to make the movie still feel grounded and not like all of a sudden nobody's paying attention to the fact that there are giant purple robots behind them that are going to be, behold, here's your future. So yeah, we just tried to make the motives as Bishop's strongest moments.
Yeah.
We wanted to make, and we thought this is again is an interesting use of, I think one of the things that I love in the comics, and I'm assuming you and a lot of people watching love in the comics, is when they work together and they use their powers in tandem. And this was just that moment of Blink using Bishop so that he could fire through her sort of teleportation wormholes was just a really cool, power combo.
No, totally. I love Blink in this movie, and yeah, she becomes the MVP. Yeah, later she does the move with Colossus, her little custom fastball special and everything. So I love it when they team up for sure. And also getting to see Storm, like a veteran Storm at the height of her power, just like going nuts with creating storms and lightning and this little combo as well. Oh man, so good.
Yeah. No, we're really. To me, again, because I feel like Storm was underutilized in the film, it was great to be able to give her some really good power moments, if not character moments, And even to some extent, I would say that, I think Ian and Patrick, other than the Charles and Charles scene, they're a little bit underutilized in the movie. This is not their film. They have nice moments, and I really love the moment later when they say all that time wasted fighting each other. I mean, I gotta say, and I'm not responsible for it, so I'm not being. There's no ego in this. For a film that was made, almost 10 years ago, the visual effects hold up pretty well for the most part. There's some places I can see that would be more photoreal today, but they're cool. They're well integrated into the film.
Oh, he'll be staying there for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh, we shot all that stuff that's basically in the front of the White House, so to speak, is a great shot. And everything that is now within this. We shot that in a basically a big, huge tent in Montreal in the height of summer, and it was boiling hot. And I forgot what we called it. It was like the green box or something, because it was all green screen, all the walls. And it was really pretty brutal. We were shooting in there for probably a month in total. And it was just like 100 degrees every single day and hotter because you were in an enclosed tent outdoors. It was just baking. And some of those guys who were wearing intense costumes, it was really bad. I remember pictures of me and I'm just wearing like shorts and a t-shirt and like I don't even think shoes sometimes.
Okay, I'm gonna nitpick one thing. How did the metal shard get past him?
Such a good question. I don't have the answer. We're not perfect. I don't mean like as filmmakers. We're not perfect as filmmakers, that's for sure. And there's plenty of proof of that in this franchise. But I would say he's not perfect, and he was trying to protect everybody else, and in trying to protect everybody else, one little shard got past him. But it's a very valid question. I'll put it that way.
I honestly just chalked it up to old age. I was like,
That's rough. Oh, that's rough. Yeah, but okay, I'm going to say that from now on. Old age.
Oh,
we all get older.
Right there. Oh my goodness.
Credit, yeah.
Akeem was saying how much he loves that character, but then he has to also watch him pop like a grape.
That got to me when I first saw that. It's so gruesome just seeing that. When his eyes are turning red and then he just explodes.
Yeah, I know. There's some pretty brutal deaths in this movie. It is pretty insane, and I don't have a bone to pick with the MPAA, but it is pretty incredible that you can only use the F word once. But there's some violence in this movie. This is that great sort of proto fastball special. That's rad.
Yeah.
And this was a combo again of Brian and our previs supervisor and team and visual effects team. Everybody just really contributed to that idea because it's a very cool idea. On
the note of the violence, it is crazy that like the start of the movie, we have to watch all these like awesome X-Men just die brutally, and then we have to watch them all and more die brutally at the end.
Yeah. No, I know. I guess Bobby dies twice, not to give anything away. So it's tough. It's tough. It's no question. This is a movie that is meant to break your heart a little bit.
Twice.
Yeah, you're right. Sorry. And even more now that you know that the true story of Banshee and to some extent Emma, but we've decided Emma's living a good life, and there's no evidence of her. She's not in the trophy locker at all. There's not like a shard of diamonds or anything. Yeah. So we don't know.
You guys did a lot of fan service in this movie. One of the things that I noticed that was kind of missing was like the iconic comic book shot or cover. Like I was wondering, was there ever a thought of implementing that somewhere in the movie?
Yeah, we thought about doing it in the prologue. That you would pass a wall, and you're talking about like the sort of wanted or dead signs. Yeah, that we talked about that maybe early in the movie you'd see it on like on a wall, some version of that, right? So it's like people who've been killed and people who are still on the loose. We didn't do it because we felt like it was a little too self-conscious, and I don't mean for the comic book fans, I mean more for like the casual fan. And then we definitely talked a lot about how to do it in the marketing of the film, and I think there were some marketing materials that had it in there. But you're right, I mean I love it. I just think it's so iconic, and we couldn't find a way to do it that felt organic, I guess is the right word to the movie.
Speaking of iconic comic imagery, there's this shot of Magneto ripping the metal adamantium off of Wolverine, but right there he was putting in these like rusted pieces of metal into Wolverine, but kind of creates the same image. Was that on purpose?
Yeah, it was definitely on purpose. And the irony of metal being the thing that is constantly sort of victimizing Wolverine. We spent a lot of time, I remember Brian, myself, and Jason Taylor, when we were working in New York, we spent a lot of time on that idea of how do you, so to speak, kill Wolverine, because he can't be killed. And even if he was drowned, he still wouldn't die of drowning. But if he was stuck, weighted down at the bottom of the Potomac River for the rest of eternity, you would effectively not kill him, but take him out, right? Because he couldn't swim to the surface. He wouldn't be strong enough. So that's where that metal thing, the inspiration came for. So fill him with metal. Who should fill him with metal? Of course, Magneto should fill him with metal. How do we do it? We make it sort of akin to the way that Magneto fills the Sentinels with metal. That's also akin very much to obviously the way that Stryker fills Wolverine with metal in Weapon X. And this was one of my favorite ideas, that Magneto can literally rip the metal safe room. Yeah. I thought that would be enough for the third act, but Brian was right. RFK Stadium that's not enough for him to just pull that up, lift that. He needed to lift more. And God, you've certainly seen Magneto aim people's guns at them before, but I liked him aiming the cameras too. There's something a little bit, Michael doesn't quite play it as much as Ian does, and it's in the comics, but there's something, like all sort of cult leaders to some extent, there's something a little bit, not performative, but like, he likes the cameras on him about Magneto. And so we thought that was kind of a nice moment. And then this is obviously pretty poetic for him to have his monologue over the killing of all of these mutants in the future.
Humanity has always feared that which is different. Well, I'm here to tell you, to tell the world.
And this is just Michael Fassbender being one of the greatest actors alive. And this is a hint toward his mom recognizing Magneto. That's why we put
Oh.
up a shot. She was like, I know that guy.
I saw Wanda there.
Yeah, she's sitting on his lap. You know, we had a race, I don't know if you remember, between us and I guess it was Avengers 2 for Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, and who would come out first, because we were both using the characters, and I think they came out first. But you know, it was a very different version than what we did.
Yeah, one of the questions I actually had early on was, like, did you all compare notes?
Us and Marvel?
Yeah, as it pertains
No,
to
no.
Quicksilver, yeah.
No, we didn't. You know, Marvel Studios was not that involved in the Fox Marvel movies. They had access to them. They'd read the scripts. They could see cuts. Kevin Feige and I have been friends since even before. You know, he was one of the producers of X-Men: The Last Stand, and so we became friends on that. And we were friends even before that, because I came in and did some rewriting on some of their movies, and we remain friends. But no, we didn't compare notes, Quicksilver notes. And I remember there was an article, gosh, maybe it was in Empire Magazine, where they interviewed Joss Whedon and they interviewed Brian as well, or maybe they didn't interview Brian. I can't remember, but at any rate, it was well before the movies came out. But news had gotten out that these characters were overlapping, and they talked to them, and they said the same thing I just did, which is everybody has their own interpretation. It's like, how many times have you seen Batman from different directors? And how different is Michael Keaton from Christian Bale, from Val Kilmer, George Clooney, and I'm sure Robert Pattinson, you know, and ours are equally different.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Oh,
No, I was just gonna say, popular opinion, you have the best. You have the better of the two Quicksilvers. Very sure that's a popular opinion.
I appreciate that. I won't speak on it. I'll just I appreciate it, because I think Aaron John's a great actor. So I think they have a great actor as well. But I've only seen that movie once, so I don't remember it that clearly.
I actually did a quick fact check. Days of Future Past came out in 2014, then Avengers: Age of Ultron was 2015. So you beat him to the punch. You won the race on Quicksilver, and I would agree with Akeem. I love them both, but you know, the time in a bottle sequence is classic. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the truth is we gave Quicksilver a classic sequence, and that's kind of enough sometimes. I know that their Quicksilver had a lot more, I think, emotional backstory to play. So again, just completely different versions. He wasn't as sort of fun, and also because that movie's full of fun characters, it's harder to stand out. You know, because there's such classic characters. Each of them obviously can be their own movie and is their own movie and franchise, whereas we're an ensemble franchise as definition.
That bullet shot that goes through his neck, first of all, disgusting.
Yep.
But did you guys discuss of like, well, how are we going to have him get shot so that he survives, but it also takes him down in a convincing way?
Exactly what you just said. But a bullet to the side of the neck would do it. And we also felt like we didn't think that Raven was so far gone that she would want to kill him, because obviously she could kill him, and that's the line she says, which is essentially, "If I wanted you dead, you would be dead." And then there's this moment where he, like a good parent, I would say, you know, allows their child to make the right decision, trusting that they've instilled enough goodness in them and believe that there's enough goodness in them that they'll make the right decision, which is still scary because you don't know. But you know, like this is where I say, like, these movies verge in a very, to me at least, good way on melodrama, where it's like operatic in its sort of emotionality, right? It's not like normal human interaction where we're just like having a conversation, or even heightened human interaction. I mean, this too is very operatic, and I like that about it. I mean, I think that's its own unique contribution to the genre, and I think a lot of that comes from Brian. I think Brian's voice and taste, especially when it comes to the X-Men, is very much that. And this movie allowed for the most of that because the stakes are so big, you know, and the stories are so sort of emotionally complex and deep. And great score by Ottman here.
Yeah.
Oof. All of us just go silent because that's such a awesome. It all comes together so great right there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really it's one of the great things about the time travel genre, and you know, one of the classics of all time, totally different tone, is Back to the Future, obviously. And there is that great feeling of satisfaction when you know that, you know, he's changed the future for the better, and his parents are still together and all that, and happy and successful in their own right. And then we loved this. This was a hard, for whatever reason, I remember as a writer, this was a hard discovery that Charles wakes him up so that he can take the metal thing off of him. He can sort of use his powers. And we didn't know, this was also a hard thing to choose, whether or not, you know, he would get to his helmet or not, and why Charles would let him go after all this. And that there is this sort of unspoken brotherhood between the two of them, not capital B brotherhood, but lowercase brotherhood. And he has a final look to her and goes.
I always find that comical, the way he takes off.
I don't disagree with you, and I was going to say the same thing. I was going to say the exact same thing, and it is what it is. Flying in general is tough. I mean, I'm trying to think of movies where I've felt as though the flight feels real, and I think most of the movies, it doesn't have to feel real because the rest of the movie doesn't feel real, right?
Right.
And I think that the tone in this, because it's so sort of grounded, despite all of the wildly ungrounded stuff that happens, it draws your attention to the moments that feel, you know, on the edge of goofy.
Mm-hmm. I kind of want to sneak this question in just because I'm kind of curious to know the answer to it. So Luke Richard on IGN says, where were you planning on ever building up to Mr. Sinister?
Well, we had a tease of it at the end of Apocalypse. You have the Essex Corp is something that you see in a tag at the end of Apocalypse. And then we had talked about doing something with him, and I won't get into specifics of it because it's no longer a 20th Century Fox property, but because it's now part of the MCU, and I have no idea what the plan is. But it was, Mr. Sinister was going to be part of the Gambit movie starring Channing Tatum.
Okay.
Cool. So this is, you know, such a amazing sequence because, you know, Last Stand ended so traumatically with so much pain. So to have him wake up to a happy ending is, I remember in the theater, I was crying. I'm getting a little teary-eyed right now.
Yeah, this from very early. You asked me at the beginning of watching this, or talking. You know, did I have the end or the possibility of altering the ending of The Last Stand because of time travel? And I did, and I didn't think of Beast, which was a great addition that we came up with.
That moment, yeah.
Yeah, it was lovely getting sort of sneaking Kelsey into the country and out. But I did have this idea that he would see, without ruining it because you're about to see it, he would see Jean and he would see Scott, but specifically Jean, that he would be reunited with the love of his life. I just felt it was such, not just in terms of altering the end of The Last Stand and offering a new possibility for their future, but just such an incredibly emotionally satisfying ending that through all of the trauma he's been through, and this character especially, who has lived and defined trauma, that the woman he had to kill, who was the love of his life and who begged him to kill her because of what he's done and what he's been through, he didn't just save the world, he saved the woman he loved, which wasn't even his intention the whole time because he never thought it was possible. So, you know, bringing Famke back was emotional for me. and for all of us. And then the humor of this.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, I loved it. Yeah.
Yeah, that was special.
easy
And,
pal.
yeah, and James Marsden is actually a really great comedic actor. Obviously, he's been in a lot of comedies, and so his timing was really great. And then just this moment, I think for Famke was a very special moment to be back in an X-Men movie, in the X-Men universe, and she's really extraordinary in this scene. And you feel, I think one of the reasons that you feel emotional is despite if you had never seen an X-Men movie before, you know that there is emotional and really like powerful history between these two characters because she's so great and he was as well.
Just before this, we get that shot of Kitty and Colossus together. Is that kind of a hint at their comic coupling that they wound up together as well?
Yeah. Yes, it is.
Love it.
Yeah, no, we this was a really meticulous film in terms of wanting to touch the comics, to do something original, to tie up in many ways whatever mistakes were made and whatever things were great about the films, you know, and be a great movie in its own right. But you know, if you didn't know any of that stuff, and with the actors to do it.
Now, Matt Simons, he has a pretty interesting question. He poses the question: since we saw that the future has been changed at the end, if you had continued with the original cast after Days of Future Past, what would your story be for them?
Gosh, really didn't think about that. It's an interesting question. Yeah, it is a really great question. I mean, it's possible that if I had in the alternate universe he's asking about, you could potentially, maybe not the next movie, but the movie after that, you could, because it would have been 10, 15 years since The Last Stand, you could do Dark Phoenix with Famke. And you could do it with the Hellfire Club, and you could do it, I think, with the screen time it necessitates, because it's such a complex storyline. Probably you'd want a 2-part movie. You'd want to bring the Hellfire Club in. You'd want it to be truly intergalactic. You'd want to bring in Lilandra. You'd want to really tell it that way. And I think you'd probably need at least one bridge movie between this and the beginning of that. But the maturity of those actors and the history that goes back at that point would have been 25 years. At this point, we're now 20 years since X1. Could have been really interesting.
I'm super excited just thinking about that, even though I know it's not something that would happen or is going to happen, but that's super exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a story by me, Matthew, and Matthew's writing partner, Jane Goldman, who's a fabulous writer. So yeah, I was looking at the credits now because I certainly haven't seen the credits in a long time.
Yeah, so even though we're watching the credits now, of course, everyone knows it's a superhero movie, so we got to stay to the end credits scene.
Right.
I did want to back up real quick to the final shot where Stryker gets Wolverine, but then we see that it's Mystique. Can you like explain what happens after that and how it kind of connects to the next movie?
Yeah, and like what are the implications for Wolverine moving forward?
Yeah, the idea was that even though, remember when we were talking about that thing of James McAvoy says it a little bit in the voiceover at the end, but the notion when Beast is saying the immutability of time, that you can throw a pebble in the water and you can change the stream a little bit, but you're never going to change the way that the direction it's moving in. So Raven sort of grabbing Wolverine and saving him from Weapon X that time isn't enough to fully save him from Weapon X. So eventually, the real Stryker and Weapon X are going to get their hands on him. So he would, in fact, become the adamantium-filled Wolverine that we know. But this would
they just go hang out or something.
I don't know. I hadn't thought all the way that that I kind of imagined that she got him out of that hard place and sent him on his way because they didn't really know each other. They're not exactly pals. And then somewhere as he was going on his way, Stryker would get his hands on him again, an older Stryker.
Gotcha. Okay, I like that. Okay, cool.
Now, of course, like we had a lot of fan questions we were unable to get to because I honestly didn't think they would fit while we're watching this particular movie. So I have some here for you, Simon,
Cool.
that I would love to ask you. So this one is from I believe the name is More Films. Is the name of this person? I guess that's their name. And they say this is easily one of the best X-Men films.
Cool. Thank you.
If you could direct a film in the MCU for X-Men, would you do it?
Sure. I mean, I love the X-Men. I mean, they were my favorite comic growing up. X-Men and Batman were the comics that I was really obsessive about. And X-Men, I think for a lot of reasons in terms of wanting to fit in and feeling like a little bit of an outcast. As a young teen, X-Men really spoke to me. And so it's something that I've always loved. I've obviously dedicated a lot of my life between X-Men movies and Logan and the Deadpool films. I've dedicated a whole lot of my life to it and could imagine doing it in a fresh new way would be exciting.
Yeah, I even have a follow-up question to that. So I know, like, so when the X-Men or the mutants come to the MCU, Kevin Feige, he actually told us, IGN, that whatever they do will be quite different than what's been done before. What's something different that you'd like to see them possibly integrate into the MCU?
I think that one of the things that the MCU does so well, and I have such profound respect as a fellow filmmaker, and then really more just as a fan for what they do, is they're really loyal to the comics, and they also are very unafraid of a more, I guess, like supernatural or science fiction tonality to their movies. You know, they don't feel like they need to ground them so much in a sort of like physics-based reality or real world reality. And I think that there's something great and very liberating and sort of spectacular about that. And so I think the X-Men could be really cool if you brought in a little bit more of the science fiction elements and even the beyond Earth elements of the X-Men. That's something I'd love, as a fan, I would love to see, because I don't know that we've ever fully done that in a fully committed way in the Fox X-Men canon.
That's awesome. We also have one from John Donuts. He's in the IGN comment section. He says, obviously, you've done a ton of X-Men, but do you have a DC character or team you would like to make a film about?
Good question. I mean, like I said, Batman was with X-Men, and maybe also because they're equally kind of dark and a little brooding. And I think also, interestingly, Batman and the X-Men are also about people who are sort of a little bit outside of the norm or outside of society, and kind of vigilantes to some extent. I mean, the X-Men aren't exactly vigilantes, but they're also not embraced superheroes, you know, the way that Superman is traditionally, or the way that a lot of the MCU characters are for the most part. So I think that, Batman would be a dream to be able to work on. Doing something original, because I think it's such a hard challenge with Superman, would be interesting, just because I don't know how. I love the Richard Donner original Superman, but since then, I think it's been hard to fully find a tone and a sort of a character story that feels fully resonant with him. So, I mean, obviously those are the two sort of, faces of Mount Rushmore for them, but those are two characters that I find really interesting.
Now, I have a couple more fan questions, but I know, Joshua, you had a question for the end credit scene, right?
Yeah, I think our reel stopped watching. I don't know what it looks like on your screens, but there it goes. Well, I forget what it was. I think I was just nerding out that I really love Apocalypse. So when it ended on the end of the chant, that was spectacular.
Yeah, it was a tease for Apocalypse, and it was something that Brian and we didn't know what the tag was going to be when we went into making the movie, to be honest. Oh. And then while we were making, while we were in production on Days of Future Past, we talked about the fact that we wanted the next movie to be Apocalypse. He was going to direct it. I was going to write and produce it again, which is what we did. And so the tag is an Apocalypse setup. We talked about how to do that, and we wanted it to be something in ancient Egypt and sort of bring in movies that we love, like the Indiana Jones movies, mixed with a sort of like gladiator vibe to it, and yet its own thing as well, because obviously something supernatural is happening. So yeah, that's how we came up with the tag for this movie.
Awesome. No, yeah, it's definitely one of my favorites. I feel like every movie has one now, but this one was it hit the right notes. It's very special.
Well, it was very different. I mean, like, I think it just is like, it's so different for an X-Men movie. And it also was so kind of completely disconnected from what you've just seen, right? From Days of Future. So like, you're just kind of like, huh, what is this? Am I watching the next movie that's supposed to be playing in this theater?
That's a great way to do that.
Yeah, and then I think for a lot of people watching it, and people that certainly know, oh no, this still feels like some sort of mutant superpower movie. And then for the people that really know, they're like, oh shit, that's Apocalypse.
Yep.
Yeah. That was all. Any of those things would be the right reaction for us.
Now, I am glad we finally know how the pyramids were made.
By the way, I will say this to me is as valid as the historical accepted notion of how the pyramids are made, because Brian and I talked a lot, and again Jason as well, talked a lot when we were sort of working on Apocalypse about the pyramids, and with Mike Doherty and Dan Harris, who were writers that worked on Apocalypse as well, and they were original writers of X1 and 2, or 2, I think. Anyway, I just remember we talked a lot about pyramids and the supernatural nature of like how the hell human beings with far less technology than we have today put those things together when each block is the size of a house.
Now we're talking about Apocalypse, and you said that we did talk about Mr. Sinister earlier. I'm kind of curious. So, were there any rumors circulating as to who might play Mr. Sinister? Maybe a Daniel Craig, perhaps?
No, genuinely no. I mean, there might have been rumors. I saw plenty of rumors online of different people, but there was nobody that we never got close enough to get to into the casting stages, to my recollection.
Well, that's just silly, because Daniel Craig would easily be Mojo.
I think there's a lot of really interesting people that could play Sinister, and obviously he's in some ways the best villain that's never been portrayed in an X-Men movie. One could argue from the X-Men canon. There's a lot of good X-Men villains, and even more when you get into the Deadpool world. But at any rate, he's a great one, and one of the biggies. And I'm sure at some point we'll see him in a movie, and I can't wait for that.
Now, one final fan question. I feel like I have to ask this because it's highlighted in front of me. It's from Gbro Remedia CF. And he says, does Simon Kinberg, that's you, know if any scenes of the Manchester incident were considered to be filmed for Logan?
Any scenes of the Manchester incident were considered to be... not to my memory, to be honest. Logan was a really special process where, in terms of the conception of that film, I can speak a little bit about, as opposed to just giving the answer that's no. Which is Jim Mangold had a very clear idea about what he wanted to do with the film. He wanted it to be a Western. And there were a lot of writers that were involved. And I would say the last writer involved, who worked the closest with Jim, is Scott Frank. Academy Award nominated Scott Frank. In fact, Academy Award nominated for that movie. And Hugh Jackman, knowing it was going to be his last time as Wolverine, was so involved and was so important in making sure that was a really special and like really emotional send off for that character. And my memory of that, just my personal memory of it, and there's much more beyond this. My personal memory of it was the Ace Hotel in New York City. Again, going back to a hotel in New York. Jim Mangold rented a room where he, Hugh Jackman, Scott Frank, and for a little while myself as well, would all meet for however many hours of the day. And we would talk about how we could create a Western, a Shane-like Western for Wolverine. and how we would do it in a way that felt modern and fresh and loyal to the comic, but also took it into a whole new subgenre, which is the subgenre of the sort of Western journey. And those were just some of the most amazing times because you had a lot of really talented people in the room, and I just kind of mostly got to watch. And everybody cared so much about that film. And Jim is such a special, real filmmaker, obviously. And Hugh is such an incredible actor, and Scott's a great writer. And so we just really were like going from sort of gut and emotion. And every now and then I would steer a little bit with comic book stuff. But yeah, it was that was a special process, and I think it yielded a pretty uniquely special film within the genre.
It's I almost cried at the end. Again, like I watched Logan last night, so it really got to me. I
Snuck
loved it.
one Logan question in there. All right.
I appreciate that. I appreciate it because I love that movie. I'm very proud of that film.
Absolutely. Well, you know what? I think we're good. This was great, Simon Kinberg. I want to thank you so much
Sure.
for watching a movie you wrote with us. This was
I
amazing.
haven't seen it in a long time.
Yeah, this.
I
Was
appreciate
great.
it. Thanks.
Thank you
It
so
was
much.
fun. Thank you guys for having me. All right.
Yeah,
Take care. Stay safe.
Stay right there. Don't go just yet.
Okay.
We have some stuff we want to talk to you about on the back end, of course. But of
Okay.
course, I also want to thank the people that are watching us live. Thank you guys for tuning into another episode of Watch from Home Theater. We will see you guys next week with another one, or we'll see you very, very soon with another episode. Thanks again, guys. Take care.